stuff like that. But running alongside that, again, I am an artist, and I found an absolutely fabulous place for my own particular interest in artwork, which is really exploring those boundaries between, if you like, the physical and the virtual, and where we as people ourselves, where the spaces that we inhabit. That was a bit of a rant, wasn't it? Sorry.
No, not at all. It's actually what it is a really good start, and I have to say, I know, unfortunately, I know. I think that just to say, I think the live stream is just now kicking in because Pet had to relog. So we'll go ahead and continue on some of your background because I want to know about that. So just to recap for those who will be watching this later in repeat,
sure.
Ian was talking about being an artist and a technologist and creating your own company to work in virtual worlds. But I want to know a little bit more about your real life artistic practice outside of the technological practice. Like, what's your background, your training in that?
Oh, okay. I mean, yeah. Well, I went to art college, so I've never had any technical training at all. So I went and studied fine art at Coventry University, where again my work was very much centred around my body. So, for example, I would build sculptures which really defined my personal space. So I would build structures that I would construct standing in one space and build things as high as I could reach, and that kind of thing. And again, this notion of this was well before we got the virtual stuff. The idea that, you know, as a person, I have a sort of extent, which is, you know, the length that my arms can reach. I'm actually gesticulating in the real world. I'm sticking my arms out. And things like that. But then, of course, it's how far can you throw something. So did pieces of work, very Richard Long kind of stuff, throwing pebbles as far as I could to create circles and spheres. The sort of structures that come out of this kind of activity, by their nature, tend to be circular and spherical. But then it gets more interesting because you step further than that and you think, well, hang on, how far does my personal self reach? And we think about things like telephones, our voice, as the technology built and, if you like, started to extend ourselves, the areas that our presence flops out into and those places which we feel as part of ourselves. So from sort of those very physical things, I started, at the time I was also got into computers and started to explore virtual space, not in any fancy way like Second Life, but started to explore virtual space also as an extension of myself, so to speak, and started to create spaces in which I could influence things and create sculptures around myself.
So where did you first start getting into virtual spaces?
Oh,
before Second Life?
Oh gosh, BBC Micros, if that means anything to anybody. I started my technological career in the games industry, so literally in the 8-bit games industry. So we were all about, as a job, I was literally creating game spaces. So I worked for most of the major UK 8-bit publishers. Started off doing graphics. I discovered I could earn more in a weekend doing computer games graphics than a term's worth of grant money. So when I left art college, straight out into computer games, graphics, then designing games, and then eventually producing them. So, sort of working with teams of extraordinarily talented people to create spaces in which people would wander around and do things. Of course, they were very, in that kind of period, the games industry was very young. And I must admit, I was quite good at designing games, which gave me quite an ethical dilemma, because I realised that I was creating experiences that were perhaps not that good for some of the younger audiences. So made a big decision, and I stepped out of computer games and stepped into education with the idea of how we could use the power of games to educate people. And so I went and worked for the BBC for a little bit, and then with another UK manufacturer. So boring stuff, but things like creating CD-ROM libraries to use in primary schools, and indestructible computers that kids could use safely, and that the teacher could restore afterwards.
I don't think that's... That's not...
Sorry, go on.
I would just say it's not boring at all. This is exactly... No, I think it's fascinating to hear how people... I think that's what people do want to hear, is some of how we got... How people got here, because there's so many different roads to it. And I find it particularly compelling that here you are, a successful games designer, and you decide that actually, as you say, it was an ethical dilemma, that you'd rather, I don't know, use your power for good, not just entertain. You're like a superhero. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm also broke, but there we go.
Well, isn't that what happens when we go to use our power for good? We become poor.
Absolutely.
And, absolutely. Academia is like, I'm right there with you on the lack of lucrative. So yeah, tell us, how did you get then from BBC and designing things for school libraries to academia?
Well, again, it was the learning packages. It was, and I'm going way back here. This is a long time ago. But basically, I'm going back to the time when, if you had a PC, it logged into a DOS prompt, and if you wanted to run Windows, you had to type in Win. And, we brought in radical things like creating things called batch files, which are like little scripts, so that when people switch the computer on, instead of having to type some gobbledygook, it would just put a little menu up and say, do you want to do A, B, or C, one of those being Windows. And from there, moved into CBT, computer-based training, and then ended up at the University of Birmingham, where I spent a very, very long time, really just working with sort of cutting-edge technologies, but from my perspective, making them usable for ordinary people. That's something I've always got a real buzz out of. So it was a case of, I understood big buzzwords and all that sort of carry on, and could write assembler and machine code and things like that. But my real interest was helping people who didn't know any of that at all, setting up systems by which they could themselves do things, and actually, grab the power of this stuff and basically teach people things. And it's a funny one, because actually I haven't thought about that for a long time, but it really is coming full circle. So when perhaps we talk about some of the stuff I'm doing now, it's exactly the same job. It's about helping people to use technology to really help them do their jobs.
Fantastic. I definitely want to come back to that when we get to your current work. And you are, I think, one of the more unusual people, at least as far as I know, in terms of your coming to Second Life was you were asked to do it by your university as part of your job, versus so many academics who've had to pitch and justify coming to Second
Absolutely.
Life, many of whom who've then said, oh, it was a mistake and we failed, unfortunately, because for a variety of reasons. But you actually were asked to come here.
Yeah, and it's a funny one. It's at the time I was working as project manager at the university, which was a weird title, but basically it gave me permission to work with the wider university, looking at the interesting, technologies and stuff that they had around, and then applying those to, sort of better the use and effectiveness of the university. And one of the things I was asked to do was to look at this Second Life thing. It was actually by the marketing department. I think they'd heard about something and said, Ian, would you have a look at this stuff? And so, we went in and had a look and created the University of Birmingham Island. Was the first thing I ever built. Very, very experimental. Hit a brick wall. A lot of people just found it completely impenetrable and thought we were all playing games, but I think quite wrong.
Very wrong. So you came in and checked it out, and what did you find in those days?
It was amazing, actually. The first thing was the community. I was one of the lucky people. I remember rezzing into, I think it was called Plum Welcome Centre, somewhere like that. And, there you are sort of walking into barriers and getting worried that you haven't got any trousers on or whatever. And there was actually people there who would come up and say, hi, welcome to Second Life, and, help you out, and that whole personal touch. which was something that I found absolutely amazing, and I think is a real loss personally. So that was my sort of introduction. The other thing that knocked me over, and this was with my professional hat on, was the feeling of community, and some of the advice given at the time to my colleagues in marketing was that, you know, this isn't trivial. This isn't some flash in a pan. This is a real community, and if you're seriously going to engage with these people, then you really need to get in there and become part of the community rather than just, you know, wandering around with a little placard which says, you know, come to the University of X or whatever. Yeah.
So, by the way, what year is that?
Oh, don't ask me that. I can't remember.
The reason I'm asking is because I did the history walk last night, and so it was great for me because I'm actually, you know, I guess sort of not a noob anymore. I think I'm a middle-aged avatar these days in that, because I know it is a horrible thought, but you know, I'm old enough to not be a resident, but new enough to have missed a lot of stuff. And so I found the history walk fascinating because it was a lot of things I'd heard about, but a lot of things I didn't know actually too. So now I'm trying to like position everything that I know, like, okay, what was going on then with the labs and all of that?
Absolutely. Oh, yes, it was a very different days then.
Freeways peeked at your profile and has let us know that it's 6 years and 7 months ago.
Nearly 7. And I'm probably still wearing the same jacket that I had about a year after I started.
You're not looking too bad.
Thank you. That's very kind.
At least you must have been stylish from the start then, because I've definitely seen some similar age. Well, actually, it's really interesting because I can think of a few artists out there who, you know, are real minimal because they don't want to have lag when they work.
Yeah.
But you look like
I'm just lazy. I don't go shopping.
So when you started making art here, what were some of the early sort of creative things that you did?
Well, I mean, it started off doing the, you know, setting up a little art gallery and thing, but the first piece of work which I was particularly proud of, and one I'm proud of, was a piece of work called Ritual Circle. And again, this was coming very much from, I guess everybody here will understand this, but this whole virtual world thing, and especially back then, is very much in your head. And you'd sit down and you'd engage and you'd discover these communities and people and friends and whatever. But when you walked away from the computer or you didn't have access to a computer, it was gone. And so I started to get interested in this notion of virtual space, but as in an extension of our physical world. So I was looking at ways that I could create something meaningful. And in our physical world, we all have spaces and places that are special to us. So, you know, there might be a beautiful place or a church or an ancient something or other, or a forest or whatever, which are places that we go which are very restorative and mean something to us. And so this piece of work that I created was called Ritual Circle. And I came on this idea of a stone circle because people seem to make connections with stone circles, Stonehenge, that kind of thing. But I wanted a way of making it more than that. And so rather than just plonking these stones down, I created a space that you had to find this circle. So it was in a big dip in the ground that was filled up with trees. And then for my friends and people who used to congregate and meet in this circle, I got them all to email me drawings. I said, just draw a simple line drawing or something of something that's meaningful to you, whatever that is. And then I started to apply them and layer them onto the virtual rocks with the idea of creating something that was more than just a disposable prim. It was the idea of something that gathered place and space and started to accrue history and meaning to those who sort of wandered around it. So that was probably the first meaningful piece of work that I created.
Very nice and very appropriate considering tomorrow's the solstice.
Absolutely.
I actually just saw a friend on Facebook who's getting ready to go to Stonehenge in the morning. I was a little jealous. That sounds like a nice thing to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, she was getting her sandals out and I think her flowers for her hair and things like that.
Has to be done.
For pagan garb. That's right. So you were thinking about how to make these connections, obviously, because of your background pretty early on. So what other kinds of, who were you meeting in those days? Who were you working with? Who was inspiring you here in Second Life, and what kinds of things did you go on to?
It's all a bit of a blur, actually. It was mainly music-based, to be honest, because I quite like unlistenable music, and so I found that there's quite a lot of people in here who also like unlistenable music, and so, which is one of the special things about this place, you're going to find people in here who share your interests, and so yes, used to play very, very loud trance music and stuff like that, and really I think it was just engaging with that particular group of people, or people associated with that kind of thing. So I must admit I wasn't wandering around at the time being an artist, so to speak, but I was, I suppose now with hindsight, creating a sort of aesthetic response to what I was experiencing. I mean, also at the same time, I was quite involved in some quite big builds. So by that point, I was working in here commercially as well. So was creating islands and things for universities and various whatnots. And yeah.
And then what were some of your first sort of big collaborative works that you worked on in terms of working with other artists here?
Working with other artists, crikey. I'm a bit of a loner, really. And if you want to smile, I have my island, which is Pahoot Island, on which I have a piece of work called The Loneliness of Being. And it was quite funny. I had that piece of artwork up for years and years and years. And then it got featured last year on the front page of The Client on Second Life. And I think up until that point, I had the
destination guide, yeah.
That's a destination guide. Yeah. And it was actually on the front page as you logged in, which was really scary. And so my beautiful, lonely place where occasionally you might bump into somebody and have a nice chat had about 3,000 visitors in sort of 3 or 4 days. And I could just remember looking at my beautiful, lonely island, and it looked like it had got green fly on it. There was all these hundreds of people. It was very special. I don't want to take away from it, but yeah, so I haven't done a huge amount of collaboration, to be honest. I've done 1 or 2 joint exhibitions with various artists, but I have tended to work on my own. Probably one of the first, this is quite an early piece too. I did a piece of work at Vivid, which is was an art gallery in Birmingham. They're now back again. They sort of disappeared and reformed themselves. I got a bursary there, which was anyway. Cutting a long story short, I did a piece of work in the physical world called A Passing Moment, and I managed to get my hands on this very, very expensive laser scanner. It's the kind of thing that they use to scan physical buildings. It sort of shoots out little beams of laser light, and when it hits something, it can work out spatially where it hits something. And it's used very much for mapping architectural buildings, especially very old buildings like ancient ruins or inside pyramids and things like that. And as an aside, apparently this technology is used by some governments to help their military shoot round corners and things like that, which I don't like to think about. But in essence, in terms of mapping spaces, these things were quite slow and would take about an hour to map a full semicircle. It had a range of about 60 meters, so there's sort of huge sort of 100-meter sphere that these things could map. And of course, all the techies would say, get the people out, because this thing was quite slow and you didn't want anything in there that moved, otherwise it destroyed the map that you were creating. So immediately as an artist, what I did was set up a situation where in the rotunda at the University of Birmingham, which is this fabulous 3-story, huge, echoey dome kind of thing, we set up an event and set this thing off. Basically, we invited lots of people, didn't really tell them what was going to go on, threw all the lights so it just went pitch dark, and got this laser thing to sort of fire off, and so this beam of light went around the room digitizing people, and it became almost, or the special bit for me was became almost spiritual, because being a laser, as this beam went across you, you had to stand still if you wanted it to map you. But you also had to shut your eyes, because you ran the risk of, having your eyes burnt out by it.
Did you give people warning as they came in?
Oh yeah, oh yes. Oh, everybody got the warning. But generated this really weird event where people would stand still and they'd be surrounded by their friends telling them where the beam was going across them. And, to have this thing going across you and scanning your body, literally dot, 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 across your body. And then we projected it downstairs. Anyway, cutting a long story short, I exhibited the same piece of work in Second Life. So we had, we took these, I only had images of it at the time. Second Life isn't powerful enough to hold a point cloud, which is what's created by this thing. But so we had this big physical thing going on, but we also had the virtual version of this exhibition going at the same time. And that was the first time I'd experienced, a little bit like I've experienced with you, Rowan, this meeting people in the physical and the virtual space, which is a bit strange. But we had people who were physically scanned, who saw the exhibition virtually, and I talked with people in the virtual space who I was chatting to in the physical space and all that sort of carry on. I'm rambling a bit here, aren't I? But,
no, you're not.
I'm sure you'll direct me.
Stop apologizing. That's so British. So English.
Well, I am.
I know.
Yeah.
I know, it's great. So obviously you've got this great background in technology. You're starting to think about these conversations between spaces. So let's use that and get to extract insert. And I was fortunate enough. Well, I guess I was sort of your LEA liaison, not properly a curator, but helper when you did this exhibit, and I was super excited. And I'll confess now that I think I may have told you this. I did the maps, the layout for the LEA land. That round and this round too, actually. Yeah. So I kind of cherry picked you to be one of the artists I was working with. From reading your application, I was like, yeah, that's going in my little island. Because I just thought this is exactly the kind of exciting work that I love to see going on here. And then also when I realized I could actually take the trip down to Coventry to see it, anyway, but I'm sort of getting ahead. Hopefully people here actually saw this exhibition, but for those who didn't, let's pretend that people will be watching that have no idea. Can you please explain extract insert?
Sure, and I'll step back a little bit further if I may.
Please.
I managed, one of the things that I've always been fascinated with, right back from BBC Micro days, is stereo imagery. Because really, it creates reality where there isn't reality, or it creates reality which is in your head, but it enables you to do things which you wouldn't normally do physically. And I managed to get access at the University of Coventry this time. They got some kit. They got this big stereo projection rig, which wasn't being used very much, and a lot of people were interested in it but didn't know how to use it. So I managed to get a deal where they would let me come in and use it and do stuff with it if I would show them what they could do with it, kind of thing. So it was a very, very nice situation. I had this access to this little studio. And one of the things that I managed to get running was Second Life in stereo 3D. This is where you wear glasses a little bit like that you wear in the cinema. And then you use polarized light, 2 images, and suddenly you get the feeling of depth. And also mix this with large-scale projection. And for those of you who can see behind on the screen, you'll see that one of the things I've done all through my career really is get rid of the computer screen, where we huddle over laptops and things. Awful. Project stuff up on a big screen, and people react with it in a very, very different way. Anyway, so I was having great fun in this lab, doing all sorts of Ian things, and my colleague Geoff Chafer, who was one of the collaborators on the project, happened to be in London and bumped into Stellark. Stellark at the time was he was doing some performance work with a different system, and I'm trying to remember what it was called, something like the Musion Highliner or something like that. It's an effect that's been used by pop stars, and it's basically an old Victorian trick where you have a 45-degree screen that you project into on stage, and it gives the appearance of somebody floating around on the stage. Anyway, cutting a long story short, Stella, who I didn't know at all at the time, got quite interested in this conversation with Geoff and literally jumped on a train. He sort of said, "Can I come up and see?" And we spent a really interesting afternoon just exploring the possibilities of what we could do with this space. And really, that was where Extract Insert was born. Then sort of zooming forward, working with Stellark and Joff, we came up with this idea of creating a space where avatars and physical and virtual could share the same space, as if we were literally in the same space. And we managed to achieve that using stereo projection and something I was particularly proud of, voice, so that physically you could step into this space and just talk, and people in the virtual world could hear you and answer and appear to be floating around with you. And that was one sort of very large part of the exhibition. The other thing that we did, and it's at this point, if you weren't there, that you'll think I'm mad, but we also worked out how we could create a little booth in the physical space that people could stand in and then appear to be transported or inserted into the virtual world. They could see themselves and would appear within Second Life, where avatars could interact. And vice versa, we did the same thing with avatars, where an avatar could appear to step into a little booth and would then feel as if they were transported and were then projected and part of the physical space, and they could see themselves in the physical space and their voice would emanate from this board and vice versa. Am I making sense here, Rowan, or am I
no, you're absolutely making sense. And I think for the benefit of those here who understand kind of how it works, and you can get your head around this, but it was, a prim inside the room. So Ian built this gallery at the LEA, and it was essentially a black box space, and it was at the Herbert. That there, I guess we missed that part of it that you were.
Oh, I did. Yes, sorry. We set this up in the Herbert Art Gallery in Coventry. So it's a major sort of Coventry gallery, a family-orientated gallery.
Very.
Proper space, as you can see behind. At the same time, we had a dinosaur exhibition, which was quite good fun. I noticed we got a couple of people in here who I know experienced the space virtually and physically. We ran for a month, and one of the things that happened in that month, and I noticed that Tet's in here, I think. I hope he's here, Tetsu. We sort of developed a group of people who befriended us and became very much part of the exhibition. So we had sort of regular people who would drop into the space, as well as our more occasional visitors, and they really lifted the thing up. Just to give some ideas, we ran for a month. We had over 5,500 physical people walk through this space, most of which were families, most of which who had never even heard of a virtual world, let alone experienced one. And they stepped into this space, and I don't know if you can see the screen running behind me, which is a time lapse of a couple of hours, but the response was, it was amazing. People would walk in. We'd have to give them permission, so it is quite an alien space. So we'd say to people, pop the glasses on, you can be seen, you can be heard. People on this other side of the screen are real people. They're just sat behind their computer screens. At which point the poor old audience member who just walked in started to look a bit worried. And then usually one of the avatars on the other side of the screen go, "Hello, how are you? Yeah, I can see you," or something like that. And suddenly the spell was, something happened, and suddenly it just became normal. And people would sit down and they would engage and they would chat. And it was just amazing. We had a lot of family groups in. So we'd have, Granny and Grandad, Mum and Dad and kids. And one of the most interesting things that I found was that it was often it was Granny and Grandad who got the situation first and started to engage. And having watched this for a month, it was quite consistent. But we came up with an idea, and that was really, when you strip everything away, and we had here, it wasn't a technological experience, it was just walking into a space inhabited by other people, albeit slightly strange ones. It became a social encounter. And of course, it's people who are perhaps more socially adept who are the ones who are going to step forward and engage. And we tended to find that with our older audience.
I think also, though, I mean, I worked in children's museums for 10 years, so the Herbert, for me, was like a little bit of a homecoming. Those are the kinds of museums I worked in for a long time.
Yeah.
And so seeing different kinds of family groups and family dynamics. And my experience from that portion of my career is also that both children and older adults just honestly don't give a crap. Children haven't yet developed the issues that make them so self-conscious, and older adults have already gotten over it. So I remember you saying this before, where it was the parents, it was like the people who were in their sort of, at 20, people maybe late teens to, about 40 or so, who were like, this is a little bit weird, and felt more self-conscious about the interactions. So the kids and older adults didn't. And that made perfect sense to me, quite frankly. I think that's part of it. So they could let go of their ego and it was wonderful just to say, being in that space, watching. One of the coolest things, and I saw this from both sides, was when the volunteers, the avatars who were volunteering, he had this wonderful team of avatars volunteering in there the whole time. I think Tyler, who's here, was one of the volunteers. Is that right?
Is Tyler here? Hello, Tyler.
Tyler's here.
Good to see you. Yes.
Yeah,
excellent.
There's Tyler. So,
and Tetsuron is our other guy. He's
so they would put their hands up and
high fives,
they do the high five animation, and then all these little kids would come up and slap the screen and high five the avatars. And then, of course, people would come in and put on these extraordinary. I was in there when Glyph was in one day, Glyph Graves, and he would put on these crazy, outlandish dinosaurs and things, and the kids loved it. They loved the Doctor Who. Yeah. When people put on Doctor Who things, and I put on Maya Paris's dandelion crown and all the dandelions because it's in 3D. Yeah, they'd go floating out, and people would just. I mean, it was just such a fantastic thing. They really got it, and then it was really cool for me. I stood in front of me, Rowan. The real me standing in front of the virtual me.
We had a few of those. Yeah. I think, I don't know if she's still here, but Fuchsia, we had a friend of Fuchsia's.
Oh, did Fuchsia get in? Okay, friend of Fuchsia's.
And again, yes, I think stood with themselves kind of thing. Very, very weird situation, to be honest. I spent most of that month being in-world and out-world, physical and virtual at the same time, which was all very strange. I'd like to come back to the high five, though, because for me that was some emergent behaviour, and it's something we hadn't planned. It's just one of those things that happened. But for me, that was just so special, because you would watch people trying to make a connection. They would literally be touched, and you would see it was a meaningful thing. It wasn't trivial. It wasn't now press the button or whatever. It was people standing there trying to make this connection between physical and virtual space. And for me, that was quite extraordinary. A very, very special part of the exhibition.
So Ian was so generous when I went down. He showed me the behind the scenes and explained all the tech, and it was fantastic. And then we went and had a nice coffee and chatted about what next, and did a little brainstorming, which I have not forgotten about Ian at all. Because I walked through there and thought, well, it's amazing, and he's built this beautiful space, but what could you do, taking it the next step and start collaborating with people like people in the audience today, letting them build spaces that could be projected and all of that kind of thing too. So, so where do you go from here then?
Okay, well, I've got a couple of things to say. I'd like to say this, and I don't want to get too political about it, but
please say whatever you like.
The whole stereo thing, okay? Second Life has virtually got it built in. Now, to make this happen, I had to subvert the whole system. I had to I managed to get sponsorship from a German software company, and I think the piece of software is in the order of £20,000 or something like that. So we're not talking domestic software to do this, but I needed to get hold of a piece of software to enable me to project Second Life in stereo. All that means doing is splitting the image. So instead of one screen that we're all used to seeing, we have two that are just slightly offset. Now, the code for this exists. It's in Second Life. It's been written. We've had various incantations of it. There was University of Philadelphia, I think it was one of the first places that created a viewer that did this. More recently, we've had the Kirsten's viewer, which had the technology built in. And I'm just gobsmacked that Linden Labs don't see the potential of the 3D experience.
Well, have you seen... Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but have you seen... last night, Draxter Dupree was here. Have you seen the Drax Files? Have you seen his episode with Rodvik Linden, with Rod Humboldt?
No, I haven't.
You need to go watch it, because there's a guy in that episode. They show shots from Linden Lab, and there's a guy sitting there, exactly, Gracie, with the Oculus Rift. He's sitting with it on, and they are working on it in the lab right now.
This is where I was going to get political. No, Oculus is a fantastic piece of technology.
Yeah, they're working on it. Okay, but
but years ago and now they could just add something much more simple. And I think the Oculus Rift is a fantastic piece of technology, but we wouldn't have been able to do extract insert with it, because if you look on the screen, it's a collaborative thing. We're sharing it together. So it's physical. So I haven't got I haven't put a bucket over my head, which is sort of blocking out the outside world. And I'm sorry, that's no disrespect to the kit, which I think is fantastic. But all we had was a pair of sunglasses, and I could be in there physically with my friends, colleagues, people, and share. And we could switch that on now, and I think it's fabulous that we've got all this interest with the Oculus Rift and stuff like that. But again, for me, it feels like Techie Land. It's like, what's new? We've got to do the new thing, and we're sort of missing what already exists.
Well, and you're slightly reinventing the wheel, I suppose. I mean, I guess you're using a really great piece of tech, which I imagine has a nice little price tag to it as well. I don't know, but
absolutely, and blokes like this kind of stuff, So.
yeah. But in terms of artistic production, you're absolutely right. You've created a piece of software that makes this work in a way that you can have a gallery experience for not that much, because those 3D glasses aren't much, right?
I mean, the glasses, I think I just bought a box of them, literally £200 for 5,500 people. And they put them back in the box and they went out. The other thing about this exhibit, and I think this is really important, is that for the first time I managed to achieve something I feel quite strongly about, which is this idea of a non-abstracted interface. And I think that's the biggest thing that virtual worlds offer, is this notion of a space that works just like the real world. So it's not like Facebook, where I have lists and friends and groups and all this sort of abstracted stuff. It's not like Windows, where I have this abstract interface with folders and files, or chat or something like that. It is just a space that looks and feels like the one that I sort of inhabit physically. And what we managed to do with Extract Insert was create an experience where people could just walk in. From the audience perspective, the only technology involved was putting some glasses on and being told they might feel a little bit dizzy if they weren't used to what was going on. But apart from that, there was no abstract interfaces. You didn't have to touch anything. You didn't have to learn anything. There were no windows, things to open, interfaces or whatever. All you did was stood in a space where you were confronted with other people. But out of that, you were then able to share. And I think that that's the biggest, single, most powerful thing that virtual worlds have to offer. And I think that the stereo immersion just takes that to a whole new sort of level. I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, but it's not. I think you've developed an area of both experience and expertise in this, and I think people should look at this project and really learn from it. It's groundbreaking, and I know other artists here have been wanting to do things like this. I know Glyph felt very kind of bittersweet about this project because he's been trying to do something like this for a long time, and loved that you did it. But I mean, it's also down to who gives you support. You got support from the Herbert Arts Council of England. You were able to find a sponsor, which is brilliant. And Arts Council received it very well, didn't they?
It did. I mean, just as another aside, we predicted we'd get 2,000 visitors, and we had 5,500. The Herbert themselves reported it as one of the most exciting and popular exhibitions that they've had in years, they actually had people writing into them and emailing them, telling them how much they enjoyed it, which was apparently almost unheard of. We had over 30 pages of comments and things, mostly well, 99% favourable, with people really just engaging with the activity. Arts Council were very, very pleased with it. In terms of the future, I'm not quite sure where we are with time, so perhaps talk a little bit about what we're hoping to do with it. We're sort of looking at a multiplicity of things. So, first of all, Extract Insert, which is an exhibition, it's very much a collaboration of Stella Upjoff and myself, and this notion of transporting people backwards and forwards. We've had a lot of interest with this, so we're now sort of just really talking to people about how we might take it forward. It is a significant investment in kit and stuff like that, but Arts Council have talked to us about wanting us to consider a tour, and we've had various people saying they would like to host it. So I think in that turn, the exhibition will go ahead, yes, all over the country. I do have a fantasy.
Even in the north.
Even in the north. I do have this fantasy, and we did talk it through. My one criticism of the space, or where it didn't work, was time zoning, because the Herbert's shut. So it was very much a sort of UK-orientated space. And sort of a little ambition I would love to do, and if there's anybody listening to this who this resonates with, please get in touch. But imagine that we created 2 physical spaces. So we had a physical space perhaps in the UK, and we perhaps had a physical space in the US. Exactly the same setup. So I could, in a US town, I could walk into this space, I would be aware of the UK space, and I would be aware of the virtual space that overlapped the 2 of them. And I think that to introduce that would be something I think which could really build on this, because it would bring in a time base and knock that physicality a bit. So that would be something that would be awesome. Yeah.
I think it would too, and I think even a third space. So you've got Freewee here, you've got the UWA, so you get the Australia, and then you've got Gracie's like bring it to LA. I think Linden Labs should host it. Quite frankly, they should. I think they should get involved. So maybe they could bring Gracie up to San Francisco, up to the Bay Area, for it.
They need a consultant to go to each space individually. That's right. Of course.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So, but then you've kind of, with that swath, you could get the globe covered. You could get a 24-hour clock there.
But I think what's interesting about that is that's where the virtual bit would click in, because one of the weirdest sensations, and for the people who inhabited the space during this, I used to walk in the morning and switch the kit on, and find there was already physically. And I'd find there was a party going on. There was already a room full of people in the space, and they were just revealed. And then when I locked up in the evening, they were still there. And so really very strange things going on. And I think that whole virtual space, this whole Second Life thing or virtual world space of being this 24-hour phenomenon, is something that we could really lift and raise up in this. Other thoughts quickly, because I'm probably aware of the time. Just to say we started a little bit late, and I don't think there's anyone kicking us out. So definitely go ahead with your thoughts, but I do want to say, if anyone has specific questions for Ian, go ahead and start typing them into chat, and I'll repeat them back as they come up. So sorry, go ahead, Ian. No, so that's the artwork, which I think really it would be. There's some really exciting things that we could do with it, and we proved it works now, and we got the experience, and people do respond to it. I'd had a smile because it took me about 2.5 years to actually get it together, and just imagine the situation where I'd wander into a room full of suited people who'd not experienced a virtual world, and then try to explain to them, you'll be able to step into a space and chat with people, and most of them thought I was mad. But anyway, we've got a body of evidence now, so we can prove that we can do it, and people can see what we mean. The other sort of spin-offs, though, and this is where I'm also getting quite excited about it, is that we almost have a blueprint for a portable virtual space, a set of kit and a way of doing that we could just drop this into different places. So imagine that we took it into a school, and you could start to engage with sort of augmented storytelling, or we took it into into training and stuff like that. Theatre, Joff, who worked with me on this, is part of the Avatar Rep, who perform, and of course this would give a way of bringing real sort of theatre experience in a very, very different way to people. The latest project that I've been sucked into is one that I'm really very excited about, and that's quite different. It's working with this technology, but with people with Alzheimer patients, and trying to create spaces where we can bring people in and they can have physical jogs to their memory, so physical items, maybe an artist-led thing that enables them to recall and storytell and whatever, but then having the ability to augment that with sort of the virtual around. I'm probably getting a bit abstract now, but being able to build things, perhaps, the thing I would love to do would be a virtual tea dance, and have people who, in their past, their social life was, having a cup of tea, having a tea dance and things like that, maybe using motion capture to capture the moves and dances and things that they might do, and then realise those with avatars in the space.
Amazing.
But all possible, and the kind of thing that we can give to artists. So, it's letting the artists into these spaces, getting shot of the technology, and just allowing them to exploit the silly little things like the high fives, which was an emergent behaviour, which is something that you'd never have imagined in a sort of technological way.
Yeah. Oh, so I'm really blown away by what you're doing. I think you're one of the most, I won't say underrated, that almost sounds insulting, unsung, one of the greatest unsung artists, I think, working in virtual worlds, because there's a lot of names that get bandied about quite often. I don't think yours is bandied about enough quite with what you're doing. And maybe that is because you're so connected into, reality and you're making it, but I think that it's this kind of thing that's really going to push virtual art and art in Second Life. Yeah. So I'm glad Fuchsia, agrees, and it's what's going to push it into the next thing. So, thank you. So Nax does have a question. What's the motivation to still log in after all the years here?
Gosh, yes. I suppose I'll answer that with several things. One, I still make money in here, so I build virtual world solutions, and they range from things like buildings. So I'm doing a large building at the moment for Coventry University, but also I've been pushing very much stuff like Unity and things like that is very trendy at the moment, but there is so much you can do in Second Life. So I've been doing a lot of data visualization, and I can put stuff together in very, very short periods of time relatively. So we've been doing a lot of sort of research to do with libraries and words and that kind of stuff. So that's one reason that gets me in here. The other is I quite enjoy sitting on my island just having a bit of peace, listening to my live birds being streamed and things like that. And again, I drop in and I enjoy unlistenable music and stuff like that, really. But yeah, the other thing is I never fail to be amazed by the creativity that I find in here, and creativity on all levels. And it's still, to me, a very special thing to either introduce somebody or find somebody in here who's just started out, and you see them realise that they can do something. I can do that. I could build something. I can, and that sort of realisation that they too can be creative, perhaps in a way that the physical world wouldn't allow them to do. That definitely, gets me up and logging in, if that makes sense.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask you a question that I've been asking people all week. I didn't get to ask Drax last night, but we were going on and on and on. I couldn't, I think. So, what's, just to wrap up, what is the one thing or place that no longer exists here in Second Life that you would most like to see again from your memory of the things that you've seen? I know there's probably many, but what jumps into your mind?
That's just an overwhelming one, and it's interesting. I think most of them are from a long time back. Again, with my work and stuff like that, I perhaps don't get around as much as I might. Certainly don't explore anything like I did in the first days. The one place that I would like to bring back, and I apologise, this is going to be a little bit indulgent, is the piece of work I mentioned at the beginning, which was the ritual circle. And I still know the piece of land, it was on the mainland. I think it's a shopping mall or something now. But that was a very special space, and I'm sad it's not there. What's weird with it, of course, is that if I wander back to the space where it used to exist, I have a memory of almost a physical place. It's like, I don't know, somewhere in your childhood that they've gone and built a shopping centre over, or something like that. So a little bit indulgent, but that would be one of the spaces.
Thanks. Thank you so much. And thanks for being here. I really appreciate your time and staying up late with all of us. And I'm really excited to see what you do next. And yeah, we need to chat about that too. I want to bring this exhibit up. I think a lot of us want to see the next incarnation of Extract Insert. So good luck.
And it's been a pleasure.
Thanks. And thanks to everyone for coming. We've had another lovely turnout. There's been great comments coming out of the audience. So I appreciate that. We've got 2 more interviews this week. Tomorrow night, I'll be chatting with Sheikh Aon. I'm really excited to talk to Sheikh about machinima. And we've actually had we've tried to do this before and it didn't work out, so I'm really looking forward to it. And then on Saturday, Brynno will be here. We'll have a nice long chat with Bryn, so I hope people can come back down. So thanks to Mal and Petlove for doing this, and hopefully we'll see you guys Friday and Saturday night.
Thanks very much.